Welcome to the Paths We Take podcast. I'm your host, Jordan DeSange. Let's hit a path. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Paths We Take. Today, I am joined by Amy from Hydralyfe, Australia. Hydralyfe is a biohacking solution that provides optimal health and well-being to us. They have evidence-based therapies, longevity medicines such as peptides, IV therapies, and different cool things like that, biohacking, personalized solutions, natural medicine, all of that fun stuff. I come from a place, Vancouver, Canada, where sometimes it's like living 10 years in the future there compared to here, Australia, Adelaide, and definitely for areas like this. Natural medicines, alternative medicines, all of that jazz is so humongous back in Vancouver, back in North America. I've been to LA, New York, and it was kind of strange not being able to find this kind of stuff when I first moved to Adelaide 7 years ago now, or 6.5. So it's so cool to me seeing this kind of stuff emerge, become more popular. And I think people are starting to want to take back their health. People are starting to want to find alternative means to the conventional side of things. People don't want to be taking your natural, or your not natural, but your conventional medicines anymore. If we can find different alternative ways that potentially could be better for our health in the long run, who knows? But that is essentially what we're talking about today. We're talking about the different therapies at Hydralyfe, what they can offer you. Now, today's episode, I am not offering any medical advice or, anything like that. You kind of have to critically think when you're listening to these episodes, people, and what works for me, what works for Amy, what we discuss in today's episode might not be for you. So understand that. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Welcome. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Maybe if you don't mind getting started by just introducing yourself and letting us all know who you are, basically.
Yeah, so my name's Amy Thomas. I started Hydralyfe 4 years ago because I went on my own, health journey, or I was in a space where I was finding traditional care it wasn't completely fulfilling what I needed. And so I went on my own journey, and then after it finally working, I thought, well, if other people are probably going to need this care also. And so I thought, well, there's a gap in the market. Why shouldn't I be the one to facilitate the change? And so myself, who am I? I'm a bit of an ongoing work in progress. I always will be, probably continually. I'm just very passionate about the Australian healthcare just system in general, and we people, I think, in our industry can have either a very positive or negative look at it. I think the Australian healthcare industry is a very good industry in comparison to the rest of the world. I just do believe that, like we spoke, there's a place for both traditional healthcare, like the allopathic medicine, and naturopathic, holistic, emerging therapies. And so, yeah, who I am, I do consider myself a bit of an innovator. I'm a mum to a 4-year-old girl. And yeah, just excited to get started and chat about what we do and, how we can engage with the rest of the community.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly why I wanted to have you on, because I think this space, that's a common story in the sense that I think a lot of people these days are looking for something more, something greater, right? And I think there is something more out there, and bringing the two spaces together is something that we were talking off air, that here in Australia is not quite there yet. Even this alternative space is still emerging here in Australia, in Adelaide. And I come from a place back in North America where it's all the rage, really. You don't really bat an eye on this kind of stuff because it's, alongside conventional medicine at the same time. I, again, as a physiotherapist, worked alongside chiropractors and naturopathic doctors and, just the alternative allied health professionals that are considered a little bit, you mentioned woo woo, because I get called woo woo as a physio here in Australia. I get called woo woo a lot. And that's kind of why I stepped away from physio a little bit more recently, because I felt here in Australia that it's very, I don't want to say like one-minded, but like you described it great in the beginning, is there's a circle kind of around you and you stick within that. But, I've always been the type of person that's like, well, what if like we try this or try that? And yes, maybe the research isn't 100% like for that, but it works, right? And I
Yeah.
think like a lot of us these days are looking for something a little bit less conventional because we all want to maybe take back our health a little bit more, and it's hard to sometimes in the conventional space. Why do you think people, and why do you think it is starting to emerge here in Australia? Why do you think the alternative space is growing and there's starting to be more demand for it?
I think because of the information that people have access to, so as technology evolves and, you can connect with the rest of the world and what's going on, and people are more, they take initiative on their own bodies and how they feel. And I think sometimes going through the just traditional path, so visiting your general practice, um, you know, uh, we do the best we can. Like doctors, they don't go in to not treat you. They are doing the best they can within their capacity. And so I think it is about, I guess, coming back. It's not a reluctance to upskill education or anything like that. I think because a lot of the products they are experimental, and that's the fact, is that they are experimental. And so there's education on both sides. People are finding out that different modalities and different things exist. So like I gave you my example of, I have ADHD. I was diagnosed later in my early sort of 20s where it all kind of clicked. And the medications, because so I'll go through a bit of my journey
Yeah,
and history
absolutely.
about how we
Hmm.
got here. But where I just knew something wasn't right. I was self medicating with prescription medication, to perform at a high level all the time. And then on weekends, I was binge drinking to clear my mind. And yes, my life was good because I was a high performing, project manager. And so it seemed like, oh, well, this is life. This is great. I've got a good job. I'm earning lots of money and I'm partying on the weekends. And that was my best life. But I, was feeling like rubbish on Mondays and Tuesdays, and so I started to look for something more, and I just wanted to know more about myself, which is when I got diagnosed, and the way that happened was, I went and saw a doctor that is actually now our medical director, who went to, he's like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I can't advise you on it because he's a doctor and they can only operate within their scope of practice. So it's not like they don't want to. It's that, even with the regulators, it's like it's just, yeah, the clinical trials and things haven't been done to enable them to. And there's other reasons for that also. But essentially, then you're kind of ring fenced into, if you see a general practitioner, they're only authorized to do certain tests under Medicare because preventative health isn't covered. So, so they can't give you a full hormone panel if you're not sick. And so these sorts of things I didn't know. And so I learned them through him because I was like, well, who better do I want overseeing my care, whether it's woo woo, whether it's incorporating some Chinese medicine or naturopathic, than my doctor. but they just can't because
Yeah, I
it's
didn't know that.
yeah, so
Mm.
because it's not, I mean, nutrition and things they can if they're educated in it, but even in Australia today, like nutrition isn't a core, like they learn about it, but it's not to the in-depth like level and say naturopath does. So when you see, a naturopath, they're looking at different things, providing different information than say a traditional general practitioner because that's just the training that they've had. And so doctors are quite ring fenced in terms of what they can advise, what they can't, what they can prescribe, what they can't, and those pathways. And so I think it's people knowing that, having more like also having more knowledge about the healthcare system and how it operates, but then having to seek out these services like individually, and then often getting conflicting information from multiple parties, and then it just confuses people and they turn online and see that, you know, something, for example, like BPC 157 heals injuries, and then they go down that path without, because there's not the support there. So I think it's becoming more popular because of the information that's out there, but also the hype being built on social media and things around the benefits, and because people are seeing such great results. Um, but so I think that's in terms of the surge. Is Australia is very, it's emerging and it's becoming popular, but it's very behind in terms of things like peptide therapies, hormone therapies, especially for women. I mean, and men, and the lens in which the medical community considers whether you're, optimal or not. So I think, and also with the introduction of ChatGPT, being able to upload your blood tests and have a AI kind of tell you what's going on. So I think it's the access to information that's sort of created a surge, and also, people wanting to take more accountability and responsibility for what is going into their bodies, and I think, in the media there are other avenues now for people to get information, especially social media. You can hear about, processed foods and what's involved in them, and people actually wanting to do something about that. So I think that's what's kind of driving this change in Australia, is we're sort of waking up and being like, you know what, I can take control of my own health. How do I get support to do that? And sometimes our traditional pathways are quite rigid, and so it's like they look for these external ways to access the journey that they just want to be supported on. As I was saying, I'm a business partner for a company in America that does IV therapy and peptides, and that's why, in terms of Hydralyfe, we do like prescribe. I was going to say hero, but that's not the right word. It's that, people want to know what's happening with their health. They want it to be evidence based and data driven, because it's like, how do you know what's going on unless that's the case? And then going through the traditional pathways, you don't often get that. You don't get the level of detail you need, because our Medicare system isn't set up for that kind of care. It's set up, it's a great system, but for if you're sick. If you're, well and you just want to be better, it's not covered. And so I think people are at that point now realizing that actually, if I invest in my health and don't get sick, or if I can stop it early, or if I'm, operating well, but I think I could do more, that's where they're seeking, okay, well, what else exists for people like me? And then there's information now as more trials and more, for example, America's just reversed a decision to make 12 of the most common peptides, back on the FDA list. This sort of information filters down to us in Australia, and people are like, whoa, and I think then they sort of not turn on the traditional pathway, because there's a place for both, and that's just, my belief is that there is a place for both. But I think going to a general practitioner who isn't educated in this sort of integrated medicine can sometimes be disheartening, because not because they're not trying to help, but because they just don't know about the products and they haven't researched them or taken that time, because the regulator's position is that it's still experimental. So unless you're very open-minded and being like, well, I might still give it a go, unless you find a doctor that's aligned to that, you'll probably get shut down. And that can be like a bit like, oh, well, the medical, you're not going to help me. I'll just turn then to a naturopath or to someone that is going to listen to me and support that journey, rather than having the support from both. So I think, that definitely the access to the educational material is causing a sort of surge within this space. People still, being treated when they're ill for symptoms, because that's what pharmaceuticals do. They treat symptoms, which we need. Absolutely. You want allopathic medicine if you've got a heart condition or you're going for surgery. If you're sick, you need it. But if you're, still taking something like that and it's not fulfilling and you're not living your best life, you're going to seek out, well, how can I? And then this information comes through about these other things, and then, that's where people search for access to them. We're just a little bit behind in terms of the regulations here to match being able to operate freely. But when I say that, actually, it's not the case. It's the perception, right? I think that if we as an industry, and sorry, I'm going a bit off track.
No, I love it.
You'll notice that
Yeah,
my ADHD takes me in different
journeys. Because this is all the things that I want to get into. So this is amazing.
So it's like you ask me one question and I'll answer 10, and you'll probably have to snip everything and bring it back together. Otherwise, your listeners are like, "What is she talking about?" But in saying that, it's like. You see things from America. Everyone is on peptides. It's very common.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, doctors, most of their GPs do prescribe it. It's not taboo. Yeah. It's just a part of their kind of medical community. Yeah. Whereas here, like you've mentioned, even being a physio, you might have a medical center and there's a physio, a chiro, an osteopath, a general practitioner. They don't share the same system. They're not the same practice. They're operating completely in siloed. And so I think it can be frustrating for people wanting to tap into all these different care, but then not having any sort of consistency in terms of, their data and their plans and, everything like that. So they go searching for other options because as I said, the pharmaceutical industry is there for a very good reason, but it's there to cure your symptoms, not so much treat a root cause. And if you are looking to, truly live well, you need to actually fix the problem that's giving you the symptom. And the way to do that often is not through just general pharmaceuticals. So they play a role, but I think that's where the importance of the general practice being supported by naturopaths and integrated health practitioners is so important for people that really, want the best care they can get. Because, you can't be a specialist in everything, right? Like even in our community, we have, one of our doctors is amazing with women's health and peptides knowledge. Another practitioner really great with men's hormones, men's health and nutrition. Another practitioner is extremely passionate about medicinal cannabis and natural therapy. He's specializes in environmental and nutritional medicine. So it's not every doctor as well. I mean, a general practitioner has a very good understanding of everything, but then their interests and specializations and also, the way they treat, it's whether we like it or not, is born from beliefs, right? Everything we do as we're human. And so, the cultural, their upbringing, their social set, their beliefs will play a role into how they treat you because it's what they believe, right? And so no one's in here to do any harm. It's just like being able to find the right one that you connect with and that fits you. And I think that in Australia, we have this Medicare model where it's like you go to the doctor with when you're sick, and you go in, you spend 10 minutes, and you go out because you've been given something to help with that sickness. The whole mindset of like I'm going to invest in keeping well and knowing what's happening in my body has become
It's growing.
it's growing because I
Yeah.
think like our obesity is going up. All of these things like autism in children, all of these things are going up. And whereas technology is evolving, like we're spending more in clinical trials. And so it's actually, as time passes, these things should be going down, but they're not. And so I think that it's kind of multi-layered. So access to information, access to things where people are thinking, well, why not? And then, also just our community as Australians being like, well, actually, given the progress in society with everything, we should be fixing these issues and they don't seem to be. So I think there's some frustration with us as, people, that the structure of the traditional pathway is no longer meeting our needs in its entirety.
Yeah. And I think too, like people are looking, like you were saying, for that preventative side of things, like I think, like you were saying too, I mean, in the traditional sense of things, even as a physio, like we are trained for symptom management, like somebody sprains their ankle. Okay, cool. Like, how do we get them back to doing what they want to do?
Yeah.
But that's all managing symptoms. And then I think for a lot of physios, that's where the care stops, right? I think it's starting to emerge. Like a lot of clinicians are now trying to educate clients. Okay, well, great, but like you've injured yourself for a reason, right? Let's dive into that. Let's look into why you've
Yeah.
injured yourself and get to the root cause, really, because I think that's what people are looking for now is they're looking for that root cause. Because like you were saying, if you go to your GP, I mean, my GP would probably, okay, let's give you this because, this is your symptom and
Yeah.
whatnot. And that's just where their scope is.
Yeah.
And I think too, like people are like, okay, well, I just don't want to be taking X, Y, and Z for, X, Y, and Z for the rest of my life
Yeah.
as well. And I think it's just maybe the newer generation, and that's kind of what we're looking for, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's like it's a very interesting and exciting space because again, like you were saying, like it's such a huge popularity back in North America and it's growing. And I know there's behind the scenes regulations and all of that in Australia that America just doesn't have as well, which
Yeah.
is why it's a bit difficult. But you were saying that, you're a business partner in a business back in America, Hydralyfe here in Australia, of course. What was, I guess, what was the process and why did you want to, I guess, tie in the America side of things? I know you dabbled into it a lot so far, but like what kind of things do you think were lacking that you wanted to bring?
So when with starting Hydralyfe, like I mentioned, it was about me at that time of my life, wanting to really manage my ADHD in a different way and learn more about like why like and it made a lot of sense to me from growing up and having these sorts of issues like towards I was a very high performer. I always have been, but it's like just I operated so different. And then so starting Hydralyfe and realizing the ring fencing that nurses, doctors, all practitioners have. They have a scope of practice and they can't go outside of it. And in saying that, there's good reason, right? Like Australia, the regulatory landscape is the strictest probably in the world. But it's not a bad thing. It means we're safe, right? It means like, and I know this probably if other peptide, online businesses or whatever are hearing this, they'll be like, oh, some can be quite like anti-regulator or anti-government. I'm not. I think that we're lucky that we're so safeguarded in a way, but in saying that, I think like we need a gateway to be able to work with them more closely, because when we talk about like gray areas, the reason I think they're there is because there is some ambiguity around the laws and how they relate to this sort of business. But in any case, I mentioned that because it was around, our medical director being very interested, passionate, knowledgeable about this space, only operating within the scope of practice. Then when we expanded, finding doctors that were knowledgeable in this space is more difficult than hiring, standard telehealth, standard locum doctors, because of, the when you're prescribing things like hormones and peptides, their review process is much more, because they are considered experimental peptides. And so, the reviewing of the customer and really being able to articulate why you're going outside of a traditional path and prescribing this product. Why didn't you prescribe a cortisone injection instead of BPC 157? Having the confidence and ability to articulate that is important with prescribing, because you need to, because of our regulation. And so I felt like there was an education barrier. It wasn't that doctors didn't want to enter this longevity medicine space. It was they didn't really know how, right? And as I said, I'm not a medical professional. I'm medical director. He is very knowledgeable, but, can't spend 3 to 6 months double, what is it, when like body doubling?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so
Uh-huh.
after, it was quite early on, we'd only been operating 6 months, and I thought, you know what, I started looking into companies that were, had already expanded and were mature within the US. And Drip Hydration, they're in LA. One of like Abe, they service Joe Rogan and, all of this. And so I thought, well, who better to get information from than a country already doing it on an open, large scale? And so I sought a partnership outside of Australia, really for that advanced like knowledge and more a medical network, or a network where we can't necessarily do what they do, right? We can't necessarily approach it in the same way, but there's a connection there. There's an ecosystem that exists with us where we can lean on them. We were able to, leverage off their protocols and, redesign them for Australian environments. And I don't believe I think in Australia, people or businesses in this space, if you sort of were prescribed something from one clinic, you could go to the other clinic and probably the dosage, the course that would be the same. It's kind of like set protocols for set products, and I didn't want that. I wanted the doctors to know, like say for instance, if you're taking BPC 157 for gut health, or general, recovery, sports recovery, well, the dosage, the frequency, the course length should be different to if you're trying to treat an acute injury.
Because we're all different.
We're all different, and we all have different ailments, and we all, react to things in different ways. And I just felt that the medical community here, it's kind of like everyone had the same Excel spreadsheet with like the dosages for each product, and it's not how I wanted to operate. I wanted everything to be personalized. And so, that kind of triggered me to go out and find a partner outside of Australia, not to, circumvent any sort of loopholes, because we can't. We still have to operate within the confines of, the regulatory environment. But really that's what's enabled me to expand the network for our providers. So our doctors, our nurses, can leverage then the team Drip in America. They're great. We work very closely together. And so, it was mainly for that advancement in the technology and what's coming, and, different ways of approaching things, which I felt then better aligned us to regulations, because we can clearly, articulate why we're going down this path and what it can do. And we probably wouldn't have our practitioners and nurses and stuff probably wouldn't have the knowledge they have if we didn't have these international connections, because I think in Australia it's like it's a much smaller community. Like there's probably like five or like sterile pharmacies that everyone uses. Like there's not that diversity. There's not, and whereas drip hydration is in America, London, Vietnam, Dubai, like they're a worldwide company. And so I felt that it was exciting that Hydralyfe could bring that company into Australia and create that global network here that we can then pass on that sort of knowledge to our customers.
Yeah. And I think that's exciting. Like, that's why I wanted you to bring that up, because I think if the person's listening right now is the type of person that thinks this is a little woo-woo, that thinks this is a little taboo still, because I guess it is still in Australia. Like, I think that's important because like what you guys are doing is you're kind of already having that research backed up. Like it's being done somewhere else. It's successful. There's clinical trials, I assume. Like, it's not like you're just bringing this woo-woo stuff that, nobody knows anything about, right? And I think that's what a lot of the times why people are afraid of the unknown is because they think, oh, well, what's going on? Like nobody else has done it, this and that. But people have done it all over the world, right? So I think like, yeah, it's scary sometimes here in Australia. I can understand because like it's not the norm and it's not common, but like, it's done other places. You're bringing in people that are very experienced in that space. So like, I think it makes it less scary in a sense. Because again, it is unfortunately still taboo, but like, just like anything, I think in 10 years time, just at the rate things are going, like we'll look back and we'll be like, oh, well, I can't believe we didn't do this like 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Like it's just one of those things. And that's where I'm sure conventional medicine was 100 years ago as well.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the thing. It's like it is still taboo here, but I think a lot of it is due to access, due to being able to access these products and be properly guided on them. Like people think, and I'll use peptides because I think that's the most popular on social media right now. But we remember that these things are tools, right? Like a doctor gets a toolbox, let's say, and there's, the allopathic medicine, prescription medication, nutrition, lifestyle, things like peptides, IV therapy, hormones, testing, right? And so these are all like tools, right? And so when I say peptides, I'm going to talk about that sort of tool as a product because it is just what's popular in the media right now. But if you look at something like peptides, it's like there are the reason I think what contributes to it being taboo in Australia is because it's an exciting place to be, but then people are popping up online companies, right? And you don't know what they're doing. Like they could be importing them, they could like even, and so you just like, it's hard to distinguish right now in Australia who is legitimate and who is not. And so I guess that causes some of that angst because at the moment, I think the education behind how do you tell if if you're being serviced by an Australian registered doctor and your product's being made in Australian sterile pharmacy, like we spoke about just before, our TGA is probably the strictest in the world. And so we're, getting it from Australia, you can have some, as I said, still experimental, but you can have some surety in the product that you're putting into your body. Whereas if you don't know where things are coming from, and I think that's sort of where it is as well. Providers are reluctant to engage with regulatory bodies and stuff when really we as a community shouldn't be. We should be inviting them in, to welcome their advice and their way. And I think, that relationship, if we build that, can change some of people's perceptions. But it is extremely common in America. I mean, Russia, Russia probably maybe a bad example, but London, like it's Australia is far behind in it, and that taboo it can also come from needles, right? To use hormones, and like women, lots like creams, gels, troches. But if you're looking at peptides, people just think needles, right? But actually, in Australia, we have fantastic compound pharmacies. They compound films, capsules, sprays, creams, like so. But I think that a lot of companies in this space, they don't. Well, we can't advertise. That's a restriction. But people are asking for peptides and just assuming it has to be injected. It doesn't. And so I think like a job we have as companies in this industry in Australia is to spend that extra time and spend that extra education. So we're not just making like at Hydralyfe specifically, we feel that we make money from solving problems, right? It's like you might not, well, if you're not prescribed anything and you're just, getting tests done to look at lifestyle attributes and stuff, it's not about pushing consults and products and making a clip from it. It's about actually solving a problem and, the continuity of that care and the consistency in that, which is how we're going to grow. And I think we started with that mindset, and that's what enabled us to scale. And then now be in a position to offer what we do to other businesses. So it's like Hydralyfe's mission is about making this kind of care mainstream. It's about, not being cowboys and pushing it out there. It's about actually, it's been a slow burn. And the reason it's been like that is because of the caution taken behind the scenes as to the way we operate. And we want to be operating best practice. And in this kind of environment, it is difficult to do because of all the, regulations and stops and stuff, but it can be done. It just takes a lot more effort, a little more money and if providers aren't prepared to do that, they shouldn't be doing it. But they are, because to be honest, there is a lot of, like, I see on Instagram, start your own peptide company, and it sounds very easy, and it can be. If you've got a doctor and a website, you could do it. But, exactly. Yeah. And so I think that sort of bias or, approach can be nervous for people because they are new products. They are new products that people connect to, football scandals, the Essendon football scandal, and, it's for the stars. And, but I mean, Botox, when it first come out, it was just for, movie stars. Yeah. Now you can get it anywhere. Yeah. I feel like IV therapy and peptides will go down the same path. Right. It's like, especially in terms of like IV therapy, people hear that and they think, hangover, when actually it's, doctors are either for it or against it. And you know what? They both have points. They're both right. And again, going off track, but I'll tell. So when I made the decision to partner with Drip Hydration, a part of the business plan, I interviewed like 35 doctors or something, some from Flinders Uni, some from like online telehealth, some like a mix from doing different roles. And the doctor's opinion on it was completely split, like evenly, right? And then the doctors who were all for it were like, yeah, like it's a, the doctors that weren't were like, well, the clinical trials in terms of if you're putting like nutrients and hydration straight into your veins, like of course your levels are going to go up, right? It's like you're injecting it straight into your vein. I think the issue is around the efficacy of, well, like say someone's been taking oral tablets every day for 6 weeks and then someone gets an IV. They're probably the same, right? Because you built out that tolerance. And I think the doctors that were against it were more around, well, does the risk of putting a needle in your arm outweigh, taking a pill?
Yeah.
And that's valid, right? And we're transparent in that. So I think, again, there's a place for both. Like if someone needs iron or needs, vitamin C to like help with a cold or whatever, like that big dose straight away is beneficial. But I saw that point with the doctors that were against it. But all of them said, people, you don't know if they're feeling good from the vitamins or the hydration. So every single one said that. So I was like, I pursued it because I'm like, well, it still works, right? Because it like they're feeling better. And so that was my reasoning in my decision making. But I totally respect both sides of the story. But I think, like, also though, if you ask me about, I'm big on mindset and how your mind can influence your body and what happens in your body and things like that. And so, it comes back to the if it's a placebo and it works, is it really a placebo? I mean, it is, but it's like if in your mind you're thinking something's doing something and then that something happens.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Exactly.
Then because it worked.
Yeah.
So that's a personal opinion though. So, but yeah, so that's why I partnered with Drip Hydration, because I just felt that it was in Australia. We need to look outside of Australia and see what other people are doing, the good that other people are doing, and then bring it back and evaluate it against our regulatory environment to make sure that it, and it does have the efficacy, and the practitioners that are prescribing it know about it, know how to manage, contraindications, and if something does go wrong, what that pathway is. I think if you're doing everything safe, then we should be trying to be at the forefront of this sort of stuff. People should be trying to prevent themselves getting sick. And it is more expensive, right? But actually, if you get sick, it's not. You're going to spend more on, and it's going to impact your life much more terribly than actually just trying to keep well. And yeah, so that's, I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Absolutely. But like, what do you think in your experience over the last few years, what have you noticed the trend is here in Australia? Like, what are people seeking IV for or peptides for? What's kind of emerging in that scene?
So actually, I find what's emerging is the private blood test.
Oh, okay.
So and peptides. Peptides have become very I think in terms of us, and so we have two sides of our business: the business to consumer, where we support customers on their journey, but our focus is the business to business or business to industry. So with our business to consumer, it's the people seeking to be assessed for access to peptide therapy, and the integrated health has become so. People wanting to know where they are, and GPs not offering the blood tests. Some actually just won't do it. Some are really good and will, but often it's still not covered under Medicare. So people seeking out these private $400 tests to get a baseline on everything. So that's become very popular, and I think that comes down to people, the biohacking space of people wanting to take control of their health and have it backed by data and evidence, So that's been a surge. Peptide therapy, for what we've seen come through, injury. So injury, like long withstanding injury, or a niggle that just won't go away, or surgery, people having surgeries and feeling like, it's been 8 weeks. They want just to see if it does help to accelerate healing, or people wanting to try something before surgery. So the people we see coming through for peptides are generally people who have been tested maybe by their GP and they're eating quite well, but something's still just not right. So lethargy, energy, like people wanting more energy, cognitive support for business owners, high performers, just seeking that 1% more, and people with injury or like sports recovery, training for something or trying to better themselves. But so our most common products are BPC 157, thymosin beta 4, and things like NAD, MOTS, CMAX, we're seeing a lot of so brain health, energy, and recovery. We do get a lot of questions in regards to weight loss, but we're not seeing that as much, I think, because, things like Monjaro, the GLP-1s, we can't compound them here in Australia. We used to be able to, but they stopped that. So the GLP-1s now are come in commercial form, Ozempic, Monjaro, and so on. So I think people are just going to their GP to get them now, and I think soon they'll be on the PBS. So we're not seeing as much as that. With that, it's more also around maybe people having certain goals, and seeking peptides to support that. So because again, even with the whole weight GLP-1s and things, it's like, and peptides, people saying, it's a quick fix. I and most people, I think, in our industry wouldn't say so. It does it and can work quick, but it's actually more around, like, so for example, GLP-1s, it's like, it's not a cheat's way out. It's when you're going to the gym and when you've changed your nutrition and when you're getting your good sleep, and you're really working on your mindset and your body and your life. And, if you go to the gym for, you're probably not going to see results for 4 to 6 weeks. If you can have something that accelerates that progress, that causes an internal motivation. And no one else, I believe, can motivate you. Motivation comes intrinsically from within. And so if I'm going to the gym 4 weeks and I'm like, oh, I'm going to stay on my nutrition plan and I'm going to stay. And so yes, they can be sort of quick fixes, but it's not because of you just want to drop weight quick unhealthily. It's there to support your change of lifestyle. But things like BPC 157, we see we had a lady, one of our friends, partners actually, she sprained her or fractured her ankle, and just couldn't get back to where it was. She was seeing a physio, and the physio actually recommended her to us. So we do work quite closely with a few physios in Adelaide. He referred her to us, and we recommended hiring a pulsed electromagnetic therapy mat and BPC 157, and I think the naturopath maybe an anti-inflammatory diet. In any case, after 4 weeks, she stopped the mat higher and was like, I feel like I don't need to complete my course because it had healed. And that's an anecdotal thing, and everyone has their own personal experience. We can't recommend people are going to get that result, but these are the sorts of things that come through, which then motivates my team to be like, we're changing the world. And that's the kind of mindset I think people entering this space are having. It is exciting, and it is like, there's that story of the janitor at NASA, and when he was asked like, oh, what do you do? And he said, I'm putting a man on the moon, because his contribution did that. And I guess that's where, people like within my business, my team is very passionate, but I think I'd like to assume other businesses emerging in this space have that same mindset. It's like, we want to change Australian healthcare. We want to change the world, and that big aspiration, it is achievable if we approach it as a community safely with the support of government and working, with them. But yeah, the most common surge has been peptides.
And I think too, it's also not a quick fix, because a lot of people that are seeking those things are potentially, your example, have spent 6 months maybe with a physio or whatever, right? So I think too, it isn't the easy route, because a lot of people, have tried the conventional space and that hasn't worked and are seeking something more, really. So that's where the worlds can kind of blend in beautifully, really.
Exactly.
When it comes to these types of therapies and when people come in, what do you think the process is like, or the most commonly asked question?
So we get asked, where the product comes from, which is good. It means people are conscious about that. Or The questions are more, to be honest, around how long will it take? You know, uh, yeah, how long will it take? What sort of success have you seen? Um,
We all want
where
quick
is it?
fixes.
Yeah, where is it from?
Mhm.
And unfortunately, this journey too can be frustrating because the thing is everybody's different. We can't say, and this again comes down to people offering like subscription packages to this. You might take BPC 157 for 4 weeks and feel like, oh, good. Or you might take it for, 3 months and be like, oh, and so, but at that point, it's like, if after 4 weeks you're not like you would check in and okay, do we need a dosage adjustment? Do we need to stack it with something? Do we need? And so I think those subscription packages are misleading because you might not need the same thing month 2 that you need month 1, and I think that's why also the TG like an ARPRA I think don't like those sorts of packages because it might seem easy, but it might not be what you need. And so it can be frustrating that it's not just straightforward. Like this space isn't just straightforward, but it is experimental, and so it really can't be. And so I think that can be a bit frustrating. So people wanting to know, how long will it take? And we have to say, well, generally you can expect to see a difference 4 to 6 weeks. However, we can't guarantee, we don't know. And it's hard to hear that, and then it's like, but we'll check in with you and see, so there's ways that we approach. How long will it take? Do I have to, how do I inject? So information on actually doing it, which is why, again, some people employ like consultants and so we have nurses doing the customer care because of these sorts of questions. They're able to advise on those sorts of procedures and things. It's the questions are generally, where is it coming from? How long will I see? Like when will I get results? Um, and yeah, that's really what people are caring about right now. When am I going to be fixed? And it's about that also expectation resetting. And it's always I've approached this when I was a project manager. It's like better to under commit and over deliver. And not, I think, not try to uh, position these products like they're going to change your life, right? I saw I'm not on TikTok. One of my nurses sent me, I'm a bit of a dinosaur. One of my nurses sent me a TikTok and it was about GHKCU and it, which is very good for skin and hair and, but it's actually also a recovery peptide, but it's being marketed as a beauty peptide, which is not legal in advertising. But anyway, it came through to me and she's like, oh, can I get this prescribed? She's like, oh, are we doing this? I'm like, we are doing it. But the ad was very like, basically, you'll turn back the clock on your skin and it's a fantastic product. I use it, but these sorts of, I suppose, things on social media, not that they're misleading, but they're coming in as this is your anti-aging fix. This is your weight loss fix. And it's like, if you don't do your right routine, do your right skincare, look after yourself, it's not going to just fix everything. It will help, but I think there's a bit of a misconception there around, and also when you're ethically and responsibly prescribing, you really should have tried other things before moving to peptides. And I say I'm a huge advocate for them. They've changed my life, right? I can talk about them all day, but the reality is that given our the regulation industry or how we're regulated, a doctor just willy-nilly prescribing peptides, it would be frowned upon because they, I keep coming back to, they are experimental in Australia. And so, if you've not tried other things, if, say, a regulatory body was to audit the doctor, they probably wouldn't be in a very good position if they're like, oh, the first thing I offered was experimental. they've also got a duty of care. So I think that's another thing. Our intake form takes like 15 minutes to fill out, and it seems frustrating, but those questions are being asked for a reason. And I think, it's great. Like I see a lot of memes as well about peptides and, the Chinese market and how, and to be honest, a lot of them are true, like it's like that is how things are evolving in Australia. But and it's, it is funny to watch, but then it's like coming back to the seriousness of it. Um, it is something you're generally injecting into your body, and I think people are um, like approaching it very relaxed, mixing their own water with their own powder, and not to say that's not going to work, but it's definitely going against what we're trying to achieve here, because the more that happens, the more APRA TGA are going to be like, no. The more that we don't advocate for the right pathways, the more we're going to get resistance for change. So there's a lot to it. People are coming through really just wanting peptides, and it's like we do that and we do support it. But if it's something for weight loss, if it's something for muscle gain, if it's that we want to be making sure that your mindset is right and your nutrition is right and your lifestyle is right, because we don't want to sell you something just so you can, it needs to be a holistic, well-rounded approach.
I think like that should be reassuring as well, because I think too, like, with the social media space, you're seeing, all of these, hacks or tips or whatever. But like, I think unfortunately, sometimes we've lost the ability to reason through things, like I think, I don't want to say gullible is the word, but like a lot of the times we see something and like, oh, I need to try that now.
Yeah.
Right. And I think like, what you've mentioned thus far is we are individuals. We all have like a certain, ratio of what we need to take or what would be beneficial or whatever. Right. So like, I think too, seeing like somebody in the space where all of that is taken into account is reassuring, because like, again, you could just go to an online space and be like, I want X, Y, and Z, but that's not potentially for you. Right. So like, I think, it's a bit of a gray space right now because we're seeing so much on social media, but like, again, there's just that lack of education. So it's good that that's coming in, I think, in Australia. Do you think there's a difference between men and women? Like, are you noticing more men, more women come in? What's that like?
To be honest, the ratios, we see more women looking at our socials, but who's coming through and for what, it's actually quite similar. Right. I think, to be honest, men coming through it is more around energy, high performance, high, wanting to keep up, without turning to self-medicating with something else, wanting to better, or maybe they have been on a journey similar to me where, they have, been through drug use, alcohol abuse, and like, and they're still, they actually are hitting their 40s and being like, I actually want to be well for my kids, for my business, so men, I think it's more around, we're seeing more stuff about stamina and help to be a man, feel confident and feel that. I think men is more targeted to that. Women, we see more around same lethargy, weight loss, but not so much anymore. I think women is more around general health, like generally feeling a bit meh. I think women more likely for, they want their hormones fully checked. They want their, things like that. Whereas, I mean, men do too, but similar reasons, but men are more targeted. Whereas women, it's more like something's up. Like something's up. Whereas men's like, I want to, I'm feeling like less motivated. I want to, improve the way I am in the gym, and so they've got quite specific goals. Whereas I think like on our intake form, men will have like a couple ticked on their goals, women will tick everything. Yeah, it's kind of like a woman. They're looking for just a lifestyle sort of boost, whereas men are like, I want this actually addressed. Um, yeah, I think that's but the split in terms of using or who's coming through, maybe a little bit more predominantly men, but it's actually fairly even.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. That's very interesting to me. Yeah. Because I think too, it's a different day and age. Like men and women, we're both looking to, perform better or whatever. So I think naturally sometimes you might think, oh, it might be more women that gravitate towards this kind of stuff. But
Mm.
I think we're living in a world too now where like men are realizing, well, no, like I can be better, I can perform better, and I want to prevent certain things
Yeah.
as well. So that's a very interesting.
Do you know what is interesting actually that sparked my is we partner with like two very good a clinical hypnotherapist and a transformational coach. So they're quite different. The clinical hypnotherapist is like I say, but it addresses problems not just like substance abuse, quit smoking, whatever. Also, like so, some of the athletes we support like might go see them before an event. It's like mindset. The transformational coach is more aligned to, I suppose, energy and spiritual, like understanding your chakras and how the way you speak to yourself and your and teaching about manifestation and affirmations. And so we utilize these two practitioners as people can access them through referral by us. We see more men taking up the mindset side, which I mentioned because I am surprised by that. Just I suppose socially, you expect women to be more wanting to talk, like to us, or when you think of a couple having you envision the woman pushing for couples therapy or whatever. It's very like I'm being very what is it like?
But it's true.
But
Like,
but
yeah.
from and that's a like
Mhm.
it's very stereotypical what
Yeah.
I'm saying, and probably there's no data. I've got to
Mhm.
back that up. But through us, it's actually the men that usually are ticking yes, they'd be interested in that than women.
Yeah,
So
I think
yeah,
too, like it's the men that, like if you have a group of men going for golfing or whatever, they typically won't be discussing how they're feeling.
mm,
Like
mm,
I think too, like men are starting to realize, oh, I'm not feeling, energetic or I'm not feeling motivated or whatever, but they won't talk about it and they won't realize that, oh, maybe there's other people like this as well.
yeah,
There's alternative therapies or whatever. So I think a lot of men too behind the scenes are doing their own research as well, which in my opinion might be why they're, seeking out a treatment and, oh, this is what I want because I've done the research
yeah,
and,
yes,
like they're not
yeah,
talking about it with their
other
friends
people,
or anything like that. So
mm.
yeah, that's a very interesting
And
space.
it's interesting, and like I love, like it's encouraging, especially like, and I know like everyone's important, but like the men's suicide rate, like and the way men are feeling about themselves and their masculinity, and I think it's like I think that's a good statistic coming out of what we're seeing is that actually they're the ones that are becoming more likely to request these kinds of mindset services or mindfulness services. And as an example, like my partner and I, we are childhood friends. We grew up together. We both had trauma when we were very young, got involved in drugs and alcohol abuse very young. And then, we sort of went on separate journeys. I pushed through and thought, I threw myself into work after school but still had these substance abuse and alcohol abuse problems up until like I fell pregnant with my daughter in my 30s. It's just it became less because it was like, oh, I don't drink during the week, so it's not a problem. But then, all weekend my fun would be out partying, and I not until my like really just before I started when I got pregnant, did I consider that I could be better. that wasn't my best life, and so and it was actually my husband that went and sought out this practitioner we're now partnered with, and he saw her for probably 6 months, and then he changed so positively that it influenced me to go see her, and that was the start of what changed us as people, as a family, and it trickled out then to our friends and our family, and so it just from one person within a group doing this, it can have such a flow-on effect. And then that's where I say, like, these are tools, so it started for me from my GP exposing me to other things I didn't know existed, and then a transformational coach working on my mindset, who now I see every 3 months just to keep me in my power, but I think that's the thing. It's like whatever works for you, like we had someone come through and they were interested in color therapy. I'd never heard of it. Like, I didn't know it was a thing. One of my nurses researched, like, set up an appointment for them. There's a color therapist in Harndorf. Didn't know. Right. So this is the kind of thing of, like, we might not offer it, but people, go on their own journey, and with these different tools that suit them and suit their body can evolve from that, where you think you're not going to amount to much, or you're not worth much, and you've got this shame. And so it's like you can evolve into a managing director of an international company, and the transition, it's built from grit and consistency, but also belief. And I think that that's also where people are like, I think it is a positive thing. I think, there's a lot going on in the world now that's negative, but I think as individuals, we're looking for more because we believe we can be more. And that's a really cool thing. And so that's where it's like these kinds of Medco products can support you in that journey to either, accelerate it, or, help support it, or fill a gap that's not there. And so that's why it's like everything is individualized. People looking for these services that go online, and there's a longevity package, right? It's like you're actually just speaking to the doctor to validate you for something that's pre-made. I don't agree with that, and I just don't think that is the correct model to be going out within Australia. It's an easy model because it's a e-commerce model, right? It's, if we just had a set protocol and a stack, so, it's like, an injury protocol with TB 500 and BPC 157, and this is what you take. Like, that's cool. It fairly is generalized, but it's like, you don't know because it's not for you. And I think that that's where there's the danger is people looking to make cash and not looking to make change, and the cash come from the change.
Yeah, because I think the cash will come eventually,
Exactly.
right? And if that's
I'm like, I hope so.
Yeah.
No.
Well, that's the thing. Hope so. Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. Now
I'll come back in 2 years and be like,
oh yeah,
I should have gone with the e-commerce one. No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
Where can people, I guess, find you guys and get started?
So we do have a clinic in Hindmarsh, Adelaide. It's open by appointment now, though, because where we've moved, so online, we do have a doctor here in Adelaide in Hindmarsh that people can see if they want face-to-face, but online on our website. In saying that, there are lots of, obviously I'm going to hero my business on here, but there are lots of credible like providers now that people can research. When you're researching, my advice would be like ask them like for their doctor name. So you can search the APRA website and make sure they're registered. Ask them what compounding pharmacies they use, because a lot of people think, you have to buy from the clinic because they want to make more money. Sometimes actually it's not because of that. It's because there's lots of compound pharmacies, right? But there's only a certain few in Australia, sterile pharmacies, that are like up to Australian manufacturing standards. So, make it, and then Googling them, like the research behind it, who they're partnered with, where the product's coming from, the doctor, making sure they're registered. That's important. Like, so looking really at that, and then making sure that when you speak to someone, they're able to answer your questions. And if not, they say, let me get back to you, right? It's like, it's better to have a let me get back to you than a false answer or a I don't know, look it up. So I think that's people, just need to be conscious that also if a peptide's coming to you and it's in powder and you need that's called lyophilized. But if you get a delivery of a peptide and you need to add your own backwater, that's probably not made in Australian sterile lab. When you get a peptide, it should just be ready to administer in Australia. There's lots of little tips and tricks. And if anyone has any questions, like you can just email info@hydralyfe.com.au and just say, I heard Amy on the podcast, and they'll actually forward the email to me. And so like as I said, I'm fine to feel I'm passionate about this industry and doing it right. It helped my life, and which is what Hydralyfe was built from. And I believe we've closed that gap. You know, if someone gets a blood test through us, we have a program where it gets reviewed by a naturopath, and then it gets reviewed, like they provide their recommendations and findings. The doctor then reviews it. They provide their recommendations and findings. The nurse then compiles that collaborative report. You meet or you have a teleconference with the doctor, 40 minutes, and they go through that report with you. And so it shows like your biomarkers in the red and the yellow and it tells you this is the suggested improvement you can make to your life to move it from the green. And you get a testing schedule that says in 8 weeks, just test these 3 things, you know, to make sure that what's being suggested is moving the needle. And so I think, anyone that isn't offering blood tests probably, there's a few sort of things. Make sure you can access blood tests if you want to. The doctor is an Australian registered doctor. The peptides are coming from within Australia because even if you get them and, you know, you get some of them come with a peptide purity report and it's like 99.7 and it's like, okay, well, what's the 0.3? It could be anything. And so, you know, you get a purity report, but you need an endotoxin report. Because actually that 0.3 could be something that's causing inflammation in another part of your body. So these sorts of things, people don't understand. But essentially you can find us on our website. And I just work with a lot of very, very talented doctors and nurses.
Amazing. Well, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing. I think, again, I've been wanting to do this for a while because it's an emerging space here in Australia. And like, I think it's, again, like, it's going to be changing a lot of how we do things in the future. So, you know, it's very enlightening. And thank you for sharing.
No, thank you for having me. And in closing, I think it's like people should understand it's okay to combine traditional medicine with emerging therapies. And there are people out there who will enable you to facilitate that in terms of, you know, going down this path, data, plan, consistency. Like that's probably my my final sort of advice in this space.